The day I became the most despised man in Lakeside Estates was also the day I discovered my own influence. $500. That's what Karen Wellington and her homeowners association fined me for fishing with my grieving daughter. What they didn't realize was that I had 4 million reasons to fight back, and enough determination to use every single one of them. If you're watching this video while hiding from another exhausting home meeting, tell me where you're hiding. I promise this story will hold your attention. My name is Remy Thornfra, and until 2 months ago, I was living what most people would call the American dream. For 15 years, I built a career in venture capital and finance, eventually selling my shares in several tech startups for more than enough to retire at 42. But life has a way of teaching you that money can't fix everything. Last year, my wife Rachel lost her battle with cancer, leaving me to raise our 14-year-old daughter, Shoreline. Grief nearly broke us both. The only thing that seemed to ease the pain was fishing at the last activity the three of us had shared before Rachel's health declined. When I decided it was time for a fresh start, I looked for a home near water, something peaceful, somewhere we could heal. Lakeside Estates seemed perfect: elegant homes, good schools, and a 6-acre lake at its heart. The realtor mentioned a homeowners association, assuring me it was just the usual landscaping, paint colors, small regulations. I should have paid attention when she hesitated before saying, "The HO president, Karen Wellington, is very committed to preserving property value." I'd met plenty of difficult personalities in my career, so I didn't think much of it. How bad could one local official be? I found out one quiet Saturday morning in April. Shoreline and I were at the community lake, fishing from the wooden dock. For the first time in weeks, I saw my daughter genuinely smile. She'd just caught her second bluegill when a sharp voice cut through the calm air. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" The woman approaching us was in her late 50s, dressed in expensive athleisure wear, her highlighted blonde hair styled in that unmistakable "I'd like to speak to the manager" cut. She carried a tablet and wore a look that suggested she'd caught us facing public property. "Good morning," I said evenly, trying to stay polite. "Just enjoying some fishing with my daughter." I extended my hand. "Remy Thornfra. We moved into the Sycamore Drive house about 2 months ago." She ignored my hand, tapping briskly on her tablet. "Mr. Thornfra, fishing is strictly prohibited in our community lake. This is a direct violation of HO regulations." "I'm Karen Wellington, the HO president." She said it like a royal title. "I'll need to issue a violation notice. The fine is $500. Shoreline froze beside me. "There must be some mistake," I said calmly. The realtor mentioned fishing as one of the community amenities. It was part of why we bought the house. Karen's thin smile didn't reach her eyes. "The regulation was amended last month. All residents were notified via email. Ignorance of the rules doesn't excuse breaking them." She turned her tablet toward me, showing a document titled Amendment to Recreational Use of Community Lake. The approval date was just 4 weeks earlier. "We never received that email," I said. "I personally manage all communications," Karen replied smoothly. "Perhaps check your spam folder." I can't be responsible if residents don't read official notices. My patience was wearing thin, but I kept my composure. "May I ask why fishing was banned?" "This lake is clearly stocked with fish." Karen's tone cooled further. "Environmental and safety concerns. Hooks can injure wildlife, and some residents have complained about the smell of fish and bait disturbing their morning view." She looked pointedly at our small tackle box. "Not everyone wants to see this sort of activity while having their coffee." Something in her voice made me study her more carefully. The disdain in her expression wasn't about fish, it was about control. "We're careful," I said evenly. "Shoreline and I always practice catch and release, and we leave the place spotless." Karen's expression stiffened. "Mr. Thornfra, perhaps you don't understand how things work here at Lakeside Estates. We uphold certain standards. This isn't a public pond. Our long-term residents expect a particular atmosphere." Her gaze flicked towards Shoreline, then back to me. "New homeowners sometimes take a while to adapt, especially those used to or broken by different kinds of neighborhoods." Her meaning was unmistakable, and I felt anger rising like a tide in my chest. I was about to respond, but a soft sniffle from beside me stopped me cold. Solon's eyes were filling with tears. This lake was supposed to be our refuge, a place to breathe again, to forget for a moment that her mother was gone. And here was this woman, stripping it away with her smug condescension. "We'll pack up," I said quietly, wrapping an arm around my daughter's shoulders. "Please send me the full regulations and the details of the fine by email." Karen's victorious smile returned. "Excellent, I'm glad we understand one another. And do check your email more carefully next time, Mr. Thornfry. We wouldn't want another misunderstanding." She turned and walked away, her designer sneakers barely disturbing the manicured grass. As we gathered our gear, Solon wiped her eyes. "Dad? Why was that lady so mean?" "We weren't hurting anything." I didn't have an answer fit for a 14-year-old. After a long breath, I said, "Some people care more about rules than about people, sweetheart. Let's go home." That afternoon, after checking every corner of my inbox and spam folder and finding nothing, I started digging into the Ho's background. What I found was eye-opening. Karen Wellington had been president of the Ho for 8 consecutive years. Her day job, owner of a boutique real estate firm that specialized in luxury community properties. It didn't take long to find her social media posts say photos of waterfront parties held right at the same lake where she had fined me for fishing. Champagne glasses, loud music, and guests spilling laughter into the night, all apparently immune to her so-called community standards. But the real discovery came when I examined the Ho documents in detail. Hidden deep within the bylaws was a clause declaring the lake as common property, belonging to all residents, not solely under the Ho's control. There was no legal basis for her absolute authority over it. That evening, as I stood at my window looking out over the lake, I saw Karen again, laughing with a group of friends at the gazebo, wine in hand. My jaw tightened. "So that's how it is," I muttered. "If it's a game of rules she wants, I'll learn to play it better." The next morning, while out front, I met an older man walking his golden retriever past my driveway. He introduced himself as Merrick Henderson, a retired attorney who lived 3 houses down. When I mentioned Karen's name, his friendly smile vanished. "Ah, you've met our neighborhood dictator," he said, shaking his head. "Let me guess, she quoted a regulation and handed you a fine." When I nodded, Merrick sighed. "She's been running this place like her personal fiefdom for years. Most folks just pay and keep quiet." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "If you're interested in some background, come by for coffee sometime. I've got stories that'll make your head spin." I accepted his offer that same afternoon. Merrick's home was lined with legal books and framed photographs of former colleagues. Over a cup of strong coffee, he began unfolding the tangled web that held our community together. "Here's what most residents don't realize," he said, opening a worn folder filled with documents. "The lake isn't actually owned by the Ho. It belongs to Meridian Development Corporation, the original developers. The Ho only leases recreational rights for 30 years. He taped the date highlighted in yellow. "That lease expires in less than 2 months. That got my full attention. "So, what happens when it does?" "Meridian could renew the lease, sell the property to the Ho, or to anyone else entirely," Merrick said. "Most residents don't know a thing. They just assume the Ho owns everything." He leaned closer. "But here's where it gets interesting. Meridian's been struggling financially. They might be looking to liquidate assets, and our dear Karen knows it." Over the next hour, Merrick and I pored over public records. A disturbing pattern began to emerge. Through a web of shell companies connected to her real estate firm, Karen had quietly been buying up properties across the neighborhood, many belonging to residents driven out by excessive fines and harassment. And now, Merrick concluded grimly, she's after the lake itself. "I've heard she's been negotiating privately with Meridian to buy a tenant for the Ho, but for her own development company. The plan is to cut off public access and build more luxury homes along the shoreline." Suddenly, everything made sense. The fishing ban had never been about the environment. It was about control and profit. Merrick warned me that things were about to shift. The lake was on the verge of a complete change in ownership. He soon introduced me to another ally, Samuel Washington, a retired bank owner and one of the few residents who dared to challenge Karen's rule openly. Samuel was a dignified man in his 60s, his calm presence carrying the weight of quiet authority. He had experienced Karen's subtle discrimination firsthand. When he invited us to his study that evening, I didn't expect to see the level of precision he'd applied to tracking her reign. On his computer screen glowed a decade's worth of meticulously organized spreadsheets. "I started this as simple record-keeping," Samuel said, his tone even but edged with conviction. "But it didn't take long to see a pattern. And the pattern was damning. Homeowners of color were cited for violations nearly 3 times more often than their white neighbors. New residents, especially those without social ties to the whole board, they were targeted for petty infractions longtime residents routinely ignored. Worse still, many of the homes that sold under financial strain from these citations ended up in the hands of shell companies quietly linked to Karen's real estate network. Her system is clever," Samuel explained, bringing up property records. "She never buys directly. Instead, she uses a web of LLCs: A Lakeside Investments, Wellington Holdings, Sierra Vista Properties, all roads leading back to her, but buried deep enough to keep her fingerprints off the trail." He showed us documents for 6 homes purchased that way over the past 5 years. Each followed the same sequence: unfair violations, falling property values, desperate sales, and finally, profitable resales after minor cosmetic renovations. Merrick nodded gravely. "The lake is her endgame." He explained that Meridian Development, the original company behind Lakeside Estates, had overextended itself during the last recession and was quietly liquidating assets to cover its debts. "The lake was never intended to be permanent open space," Merrick said. 30 years ago, the original development plan actually proposed lakefront condominiums. A construction only halted due to environmental restrictions at the time. "Those restrictions have eased," Samuel added. "And with Karen's connections at City Hall, she could get new permits approved without much resistance. Half a dozen luxury homes along that shoreline could bring in $7 or $8 million in revenue." My professional instincts kicked in. "Tell me more about Meridian's financial condition," I said. Samuel smiled slightly, recognizing the tone of a fellow strategist. Over the following days, he connected me with a few of his old banking contacts, who discreetly shared what they knew. Meridian was in serious trouble. They had sunk massive loans into a commercial development that collapsed when anchor tenants pulled out during the pandemic. Their credit lines were maxed, and they were quietly selling land to stay afloat. The lake property, A, valued around $300,000 A, was one of their last unencumbered assets. Meanwhile, Merrick began quietly organizing informal meetings among residents who had also grown wary of Karen's heavy hand. We rotated between Samuel's home, the local library, and even the back room of a sympathetic baker's shop. Each meeting revealed new accounts of Karen's manipulation. She cited me for excessive holiday decorations the day after I spoke against her at a council meeting, said James Morris, a retired teacher. "I've had the same lights for 15 years. Suddenly they were too bright. My foster kids were banned from the community pool for being too loud," shared Maria Gonzalez, a healthcare worker. "When I asked what rule they broke, she said it was her executive decision." Then came Diana Winters, a young widow who had moved in just before me. "She brought an inspection committee through my backyard to check for mosquito breeding grounds," she said. 2 days later, I had 5 violations for things my neighbors also had. When I pointed that out, Karen told me maybe this community isn't the right fit for someone in my situation. Each story revealed the same calculated pattern: isolate the centers, apply selective pressure through rules, force compliance, or drive them out. Those who resisted faced escalating harassment. Those who surrendered learned silence. Through these secret gatherings, we began building something new, an organized resistance. Samuel set up a secure communication network where residents could share information safely, out of Karen's reach. And while our alliance grew, I turned my focus toward Karen herself. With my background in finance, I knew how to uncover what people worked hardest to hide. I started tracing her personal and business filings, property records, and financial disclosures. What I uncovered next genuinely surprised me. Despite the image of power and prosperity she had so carefully built, Wellington Properties stood on a fragile foundation. Karen had mortgaged nearly everything she owned, taking out multiple credit lines just to maintain her extravagant lifestyle and fuel her hunger for more acquisitions. If the lake development failed, it wouldn't just be a business setback, it would be financial ruin. She's not driven by greed alone, I told Merrick and Samuel during one of our late-night strategy sessions. She's desperate. These financial records show she's stretched beyond her limits. The lake project isn't a luxury, it's her lifeline. That realization changed everything. We were no longer facing a neighborhood bully flexing control, we were confronting someone fighting for economic survival. And that made her twice as dangerous, but also far more exposed. At Samuel's suggestion, I contacted Robert Chen, a real estate broker who knew the local market inside out. We met at a quiet cafe tilde copyright, far from our community, to keep things private. Karen's been trying to piece together financing to buy the lake property for around $300,000, Robert said in a low voice. But Meridian Development is drowning. They need to sell fast. They gave her a 60-day exclusive negotiation window, but if someone walks in with immediate payment, they'd likely take it. He leaned closer and added, honestly, her entire portfolio's smoke and mirrors. On paper, Wellington Properties looks impressive, but she's leveraged to the bone. She's been using her whole influence and social circle to maintain appearances. But one bad quarter, maybe two, and she's finished. That explained her aggression. She wasn't just chasing profit, she was buying time. The lake deal was her last hope to keep creditors away. I began shaping a counterplan. My background as a venture capitalist had trained me to spot distressed assets with hidden potential, and this lake property fit that perfectly. I could make an immediate, all-cash offer that would be irresistible to a company as desperate as Meridian. The key question was, when to strike. We wait until Karen commits, Samuel advised. Let her go public. Let her announce special assessments and stake her reputation. When she's fully tied to it, then we move. Merrick agreed. The deeper she digs in, the harder she'll fall. And when she does, the community will finally see who she really is. We swore absolute secrecy to outsiders, and especially to Karen's informants. We looked like a small group of disgruntled homeowners documenting home abuse. She clearly suspected we were organizing, proven by the sudden wave of selective rule enforcement against her supporters, but she had no idea what our true objective was. Once our intelligence was complete, Robert arranged a discreet meeting with Tom Branson, the Meridian executive overseeing the lake sale. It was time to push forward. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room inside a downtown law office, far from the reach of local gossip. Tom didn't waste time. I'll be honest, he said. We gave Wellington Properties a 60-day exclusive negotiation period, but if someone can offer a quick close, we'll listen. Meridian needs liquidity now. Karen's still scrambling to gather investors, but we needed the cash yesterday. What's her proposal? I asked. $300,000 spread over 18 months through a complicated financing setup, Tom replied, rubbing his temples. Our CFO wants this property gone immediately so we can refocus on our downtown development. I nodded, letting the silence hang just long enough before replying. I can offer $350,000, all cash. 7-day close. Tom's brows lifted. That would absolutely get the board's attention, he said, clearly caught off guard. But understand this, Karen Wellington has allies in local government. She won't take this quietly. I'm counting on that, I said, with a small, deliberate smile. 2 days later, I had a signed preliminary agreement in hand, contingent only on a standard environmental review that could be completed within the week. To protect the operation's secrecy, the buyer was listed as Thornycroft Holdings LLC, a shell company I'd created specifically for this deal. Unless Karen personally dug through the state registry, she wouldn't know whose move had just changed the game. As my quiet campaign gained momentum and I built a network of allies, it seemed Karen had finally sensed the shift. Almost overnight, violation notices began landing on my doorstep for the most absurd reasons imaginable: improper weed control, unauthorized landscaping materials, a supposed mailbox height discrepancy, and even a fine claiming my garage door was painted the wrong shade of taupe, despite being the exact color approved when I moved in. The flood of notices came with precision. $100 here, $200 there. Within 2 weeks, The total had climbed to nearly $2,000 in arbitrary fines. Each appeal I submitted either vanished into bureaucratic limbo or was dismissed without explanation. It became unmistakably clear Karen was using the hose authority as a weapon, her way of forcing me back into submission. Then came the moment that turned irritation into alarm. Sen had left her bicycle in the driveway for a few minutes while running inside to answer a call. Within 15 minutes, a violation notice appeared on our front door, complete with time-stamped photographs of the offense. Someone was clearly watching our home, waiting for the smallest pretext to pounce. The pattern was too systematic to ignore, and soon, I realized the harassment wasn't limited to me. Anyone who had been seen attending one of our discreet meetings found themselves targeted as well. Maria Gonzalez received a notice claiming her grass was a quarter-inch too long, personally measured by Karen herself. James Morris, who'd had a bird feeder in his yard for more than a decade, was suddenly fined under a newly cited aesthetic obstruction clause. Diana Winters, one of the gentlest souls in the neighborhood, was cited for improper waste placement because her recycling bin was 6 inches too close to her garage wall. It was a transparent campaign of intimidation, but instead of breaking us, it galvanized the community. Each absurd violation seemed to recruit another neighbor to our cause. By the third week, our private messaging group had grown to include nearly 30 households, more than a quarter of the neighborhood. Karen's heavy-handed tactics were backfiring spectacularly. The situation escalated when the conflict reached my daughter. Sen came home from school in tears. "The kids say we're troublemakers," she sobbed. Brianna told everyone her mom said we're ruining the neighborhood and lowering property values. A little digging revealed that Brianna's mother was one of Karen's closest allies on the whole board. The battle had turned personal. Karen was now targeting my family. That night, after Sen had fallen asleep, I called Merrick. "I'm thinking about selling," I admitted quietly. "This is too much. It's hurting her." "That's exactly what Karen wants," Merrick said without hesitation. "She's done it before, at least 6 families. She buries them in violations until they sell below market value, then her real estate partners swoop in and buy cheap. Don't give her that satisfaction." He was right. Walking away would mean surrendering, and worse, teaching my daughter that bullies win when you back down. That same evening, a message from Robert arrived. The environmental review on the lake property had come back clean, and Meridian's board had accepted my offer. The paperwork was ready for signing. While reviewing whole bylaws one last time, I found something explosive, a single clause that could undo everything Karen was planning. Her proposed special assessment, the one she had framed as a community-funded beautification project but was clearly intended to bankroll her purchase of the lake, required 75% homeowner approval, not the simple majority she had claimed in her presentation. She was attempting to override the home's own charter, confident no one would scrutinize her tactics. That discovery hardened my resolve. "They've dragged my child into this," I whispered to myself as I closed my laptop. "Time to show them what happens when you challenge someone who's made a career out of dismantling broken systems." The next morning, I withdrew $350,000 from my investment account, roughly 15% more than Karen's proposed offer. When I called Samuel to update him, he not only encouraged me but offered an additional $50,000 of his own to strengthen our position. Within 48 hours, every signature was in place. The lake, 6 acres of it, including the 10-foot shoreline buffer, now belonged entirely to me, not to the Hope, and certainly not to Karen Wellington. The timing was exquisite. The very next day, Karen had scheduled a special home meeting to unveil her grand vision for the lake's future. She had even commissioned architectural renderings from a local firm. Glossy mock-ups displayed on the community bulletin board showed her true intentions: to shrink the lake by nearly 20% and replace public fishing areas with the private, members-only lakeside lounge. I shared none of this with the broader group, only with Merrick and Samuel. Our secret had to hold. Karen, meanwhile, grew increasingly frantic. In a last-ditch attempt to seize control, she called an emergency home meeting, this time under the guise of approving a critical special assessment, and she had no idea that the very property she was trying to claim had already slipped through her fingers. Critical community improvements. Her proposal imposed an additional $50 a month on every household, a contribution she claimed would preserve the lake here, but in truth, it was meant to finance her personal conquest of it. At the front of the room, she stood behind the podium, her PowerPoint blazing across the screen, elevating Lakeside Estates a premier vision. For 20 polished minutes, she preached about the strategic reimagining that would supposedly raise property values and enhance community prestige. Omitted, of course, was the fact that her real estate company would manage every inch of the development, pocketing profits from the new lakeside parcels she intended to create. Her performance soon took a darker turn. Without naming me, Karen began hinting at certain disruptive influences in the neighborhood, individuals who, according to her, lacked proper values and posed financial risks to the community. It was a transparent smear, a petty attempt to discredit me before my neighbors. Samuel Washington rose in my defense, speaking calmly and with dignity, only for Karen to strike him with a venomous smile. "I find it fascinating," she said sweetly, "that someone who once had to negotiate unpaid taxes with the IRS feels qualified to advise us on standards." Her words dripped with malice. Samuel's issue had been a clerical mix-up resolved years ago, but in Karen's hands, it became a weapon of humiliation. The meeting only worsened when Sapphira Duskillen gently suggested that the community deserved a vote before changing lake regulations. Karen's eyes turned cold. "Sapphira," she said smoothly, "I believe your flower shop lease renewal is coming up soon, isn't it? I'd hate for there to be any complications." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Sapphira fell silent. I watched the display of intimidation with unexpected calm. Karen was performing for an audience, unaware that her grand empire was already crumbling. The lake she was so proudly using as a centerpiece no longer belonged to Meridiana or to her. That quiet knowledge was its own reward. Her desperation grew. Through her alliance with Mayor James Wilson, she weaponized bureaucracy. Random home inspections appeared without warning, and sudden concern surfaced about construction done by the home's previous owner. The mayor kept his distance, but his cousin, conveniently a building inspector, began circling my property with suspicious regularity. Even my daughter felt the strain. 3 times in 2 weeks she came home in tears, ostracized at school by classmates repeating their parents' gossip. My patience was thinning when the call I had been anticipating finally came. Meridian's attorney confirming that Karen had been notified of the sale. The lake was now owned by an anonymous investor, and all negotiations with her were terminated. That evening, she appeared on my doorstep, her mask cracking. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I know you were talking to Meridiana. Did you sabotage my deal?" I smiled politely. "I'm not sure what you mean, Karen, though I did hear the property was sold. I hope the Ho enjoys working with the new owner." Her eyes hardened. "This isn't over. The Ho has a binding recreational use agreement. Whoever bought that land can't restrict access without our consent." "Then you might want to reread the contract," I replied evenly. "From what I understand, it expires in less than a month and renewal is entirely at the property owner's discretion." The color drained slightly from her face, but she recovered quickly. "The community won't tolerate this," she hissed. "We'll sue for access." "Good luck," I said simply, closing the door. What followed was chaos. Within hours, Karen convened a closed-door board session, desperate to identify the mysterious buyer. She rallied the mayor, grasping at zoning arguments and even hinting at eminent domain claims Merrick later assured me were legally absurd. As she scrambled for control, I met quietly with environmental experts and conservation advocates. Their assessment revealed the truth beneath the lake's placid surface. Years of unchecked landscaping runoff had poisoned the ecosystem, choking it with algae and threatening the fish population. While Karen had preached preservation, she had ignored the lake's genuine health entirely. I had already begun consulting a security specialist about installing cameras and drafting a professional management plan for the lake property. Every precaution was being put in place for the moment I would reveal myself as its true owner. That turning point arrived when Karen attempted to make one of her signature displays of control. She organized an extravagant lakeside celebration exclusively for the original homeowners, deliberately excluding the newer residents, a symbolic declaration of her supposed ownership. The event promised live music, catered meals, and elegant twine bars glimmering at both ends of the lake. What Karen didn't realize was that I had already filed the necessary documents to terminate the recreational use agreement ahead of schedule. The host blatant neglect of maintenance and water quality standards gave my attorney more than enough grounds for immediate cancellation. Though the agreement was due to expire within the month, the violation evidence made the termination legally sound. I decided that her party would be the perfect stage for the truth. As the music swelled and about 60 guests mingled beneath the string lights, I arrived accompanied by Merrick Samuel, my real estate attorney, and the local police officer I had already briefed. Calmly, I walked toward the center of the gathering and took hold of the microphone Karen had been using to make announcements. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began, my voice carrying easily over the chatter. "I hope you're all enjoying this beautiful day by the lake." Karen stormed forward, face tight with irritation. "This is a private community event," she snapped. "You weren't invited." I kept my tone even and my grip steady. "Actually, Karen, I believe there's been a misunderstanding about who holds the right to issue invitations." At my signal, my attorney stepped forward and handed me a document. I unfolded it deliberately. "As the legal owner of this lake and all property extending 10 feet beyond its shoreline," I announced, "I must inform you that everyone currently present is trespassing on private land." The music stuttered to a stop. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's expression darkened to a furious shade of red. "What on earth are you talking about? This belongs to the home." "No, Karen," I replied evenly. "It belonged to Meridian Developmenta until 3 days ago, when I purchased it outright. I held the deed high for everyone to see. And as of this moment, I am terminating the hole's recreational use agreement, which would have expired in 28 days anyway." I gestured toward the officer beside me. "Officer Reynolds is here to ensure that everyone departs peacefully. You have 15 minutes to collect your things and leave the property." Karen stood frozen, her face a study in disbelief. "You can't do this," she hissed. "The community has rights." "Actually, I can," I replied quietly, "and Officer Reynolds is ready to file a trespassing report if necessary. But I doubt that will be needed. You, of all people, should appreciate the importance of following the rules." A heavy silence settled over the lake. Then, one by one, people began to gather their belongings, whispering among themselves. I took one last moment at the microphone. "For those wondering," I said clearly, "this is what happens when power goes unchecked for too long. Consider this a reminder that authority without accountability always ends the same way." The crowd dispersed quickly. Many guests avoided Karen's gaze, their expressions a mix of discomfort and realization. Several lingered near me before leaving, some whispering quiet thanks. About time someone stood up to her. One man said under his breath, "This has been a long time coming." Within the week, I installed private property and no trespassing signs around the lake perimeter and hired 24-hour security patrols. Soon after, I held a small press conference with the local paper to share my vision for the property's future via a transformation from contested community lake to a conservation and education site. "This lake has been environmentally neglected for years," I explained to the reporters. "Tests show alarming levels of phosphates and nitrates from fertilizer runoff. Our restoration plan will protect the ecosystem and create an educational space for local students to learn about conservation." At first, public reaction was divided. Many were upset at losing access to the water, but as details of Karen's secret development plan emerged, her intent to sell off portions of the shoreline for personal profit, sympathy began to shift. The revelation shattered her credibility. What had once been portrayed as community improvement was exposed as greed in disguise. Karen's fury was immediate. She filed a lawsuit against me, accusing me of destroying community value. The court dismissed her claim within days once my attorney presented the clear property deed and the expired access agreement. Still unwilling to accept defeat, she rallied the whole to impose new penalties against me: fines, restrictions, even a proposed lien on my home. But her influence was already crumbling. The true turning point came when Safira Duskillen finally found her voice at an home meeting. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood, but her words grew stronger with every sentence. "I've been on the sport for 3 years," she said, "and I've watched Karen manipulate our regulations, target specific homeowners, and divert association funds to benefit her friends' properties. Last year alone, we spent $80,000 on projects that never went through community approval. Gasps rippled through the room. The silence that followed carried more weight than any verdict could. Safira's testimony hit like a spark in dry grass. She described how $80,000 of whole funds had been diverted to renovate a small park serving barely 10 homes, all owned by Karen's closest friends, while requests for new playground equipment in the main community park were repeatedly denied. Her courage ignited something in the room. At the next meeting, residents who had remained silent for years began to speak. One after another, they recounted stories of selective fines, buried complaints, and manipulated votes. What began as a single act of defiance became a reckoning. A motion was quickly introduced to audit the Ho's finances from the past 5 years. As the records were examined, irregularities began surfacing: payments to shell companies, inflated project costs, unexplained transfers. For the first time, Karen's authority was crumbling, not because of external pressure, but because her own neighbors had stopped fearing her. The community was dividing, but not as she had predicted. Instead of uniting against me, residents were beginning to realize that the true problem lay within the Ho's leadership itself. Sensing the moment, I launched a new initiative: free fishing passes for every child in the community, with one simple caveat: children of current Ho board members would only be eligible once their parents resigned. It was, admittedly, a touch vindictive, but it was effective. Within days, residents who had once sneered at me alongside Karen appeared at my door, awkward and conciliatory. They wanted passes for their children. They wanted inclusion again. "My son really wants to learn to fish," said Veronica Palmer, one of Karen's most outspoken allies. Her voice carried the brittle politeness of someone forced to swallow pride. "Your daughter mentioned there's a junior conservation program?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Just weeks earlier, this same woman had turned away when I greeted her at the community pool. "Yes," I replied evenly. "It's an educational program about ecology and sustainable fishing. Sen is helping organize it, but it's only open to families who aren't currently represented on the whole board." Veronica hesitated, her face shifting between indignation and calculation. "I've been reconsidering my position lately," she admitted. "Some of the board's recent decisions are troubling." "How interesting," I said with measured calm. "If your situation changes, let me know." The program begins next Saturday. 3 days later, Veronica publicly resigned from the whole board, citing personal reasons. 2 more members followed her lead within the week. Karen, cornered and increasingly desperate, retaliated with rumors. She claimed the lake was contaminated and unsafe, attempting to poison public opinion just as thoroughly as she had once poisoned trust. But I was ready. I published official laboratory results proving the water was cleaner now than it had ever been under home management. Then came her most audacious move yet. She tried to bribe Merrick Henderson. Merrick arrived at my house one afternoon, amusement glinting in his eyes, holding a small recorder. "You'll want to hear this," he said. Karen's voice came through clearly. "I can make all your violation notices disappear, Merrick. And once the new board is formed, there will be a place for you paid. Of course, all you have to do is convince Thorncraft to sell the lake back to the Ho. Tell him it's an environmental liability, that insurance costs will ruin him. Scare him a little." Merrick chuckled as the recording ended. "I think Karen forgot the first rule of being a villain," he said. "Never try to bribe a retired ethics attorney." Her downfall accelerated soon after. Late one night, my security cameras captured her and 2 remaining board members trespassing on the property, plastic bottles in hand, crouched by the waterline. The footage showed her pouring something into the lake, near the spot where children often fished. The evidence was damning. I forwarded it to the police immediately. Karen was charged with criminal trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. During processing, investigators began examining the Ho's finances in greater detail. What they uncovered was worse than anyone expected: a proof of fund misappropriation, selective enforcement of regulations, and evidence she had been deliberately driving down property values to allow her real estate partners to buy cheap. The empire she had built on intimidation and deceit collapsed almost overnight. 2 weeks later, I hosted a meeting at my home. Every household was invited except the current home leadership. Nearly the entire community showed up, eager for a new start. I laid my plan before them. The lake, I explained, would be placed into a community trust under 3 conditions. First, the whole board would be completely restructured with term limits and transparent elections. Second, all existing regulations would undergo review to ensure fairness and accountability. Third, an independent ethics committee rotating among ordinary residents would oversee every whole decision moving forward. For the first time in years, the room felt unified, not fearful, not divided, hopeful. Many of you may not be aware, I began, letting the quiet stretch through the room, but over the past month, I've been making a few discreet purchases. A wave of puzzled glances passed between numbers. Specifically, I've acquired several mortgage notes from Lakeside National Bank covering homes right here in our community. A murmur rippled through the crowd, then I added, almost casually, including Karen Wellington's property. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. For years, Karen had ruled through intimidation. Now, she was realizing that influence flows both ways. Through my financial connections and Samuel's quiet negotiations, I had legally purchased nearly 20% of the neighborhood's outstanding mortgage debt, focusing primarily on properties owned by Karen's loyalists. It was bold, unorthodox, but perfectly lawful, and it gave me something she had always wielded: leverage. I have no intention of foreclosing on anyone, I said, calming the tension before it grew teeth. In fact, I'm offering refinancing at below market rates to every homeowner here. But before we rebuild our homes, we must rebuild our foundation of the system that allowed this corruption to thrive. When the vote to restructure the HO was called, that decision was nearly unanimous. Karen Wellington was removed from her position in disgrace. Her empire of manipulation collapsed beneath the weight of truth and accountability. She now faced criminal charges for trespassing and attempted contamination, alongside multiple civil suits from residents she had unjustly penalized. Her real estate ventures crumbled under investigation, and within months, her own house sat unsold, tainted not by location, but by legacy. The community, finally free of her grip, began to heal. Safira Duskan was elected as the new HOPE president, her first promise being total transparency and fair governance. Under her leadership, the lake was renamed Rachel's Lake, in honor of my late wife, a woman whose grace and compassion had once held this community together when nothing else could. I formally transferred ownership of the lake to the newly created Community Trust, legally bonding its protection and accessibility for all residents, forever. 3 months later, Shoreline and I hosted a community fishing day at Rachel's Lake. Nearly every household attended. Children ran along the shore with fishing poles twice their size, laughter echoing across the water. Parents who once avoided each other now shared coffee and stories beneath the shade trees. For the first time in years, our neighborhood felt like a community again. As the sun sank below the horizon and the lake turned to gold, Shoreline leaned against my shoulder, her voice soft. "Mom would be proud of you, Dad." I looked out over the calm water, the reflection of families, laughter, peace. "I think she'd be proud of both of us," I said. A year later, that same lake became a symbol of reform. Neighboring developments adopted our governance structure and ethics charter. Rachel's Lake wasn't just a landmark, it was proof that fairness could replace fear, that transparency could outlast tyranny. Karen Wellington eventually left town, her assets gone, her name a quiet cautionary tale. Around that time, I was approached to run for mayor, after James Wilson withdrew amid the exposure of his dealings with Karen. I declined. I'd fought my battle. My war was over. Instead, I established the scholarship fund in Rachel's name, for children who had lost a parent to cancer, an act of rebuilding, not revenge. Because, in the end, victory isn't about destroying a bully. It's about changing the very game that allows bullies to exist. So if you're watching this, facing your own home nightmare or any system that feels too powerful to challenge you, remember this: knowledge of the rules is power, patience is strategy, and when both work together, justice stops being an accident. It becomes